ma 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 ma. Hello everyone, Ryan here, and today I'm doing another episode of the Decade Later series. This time on episode 3 I'm going to be focusing on Bon Iver's Forever Ago. Bon Iver is an indie folk band and they are from Wisconsin, and Forever Ago was initially released in 2007 independently, but then in 2008 it saw a huge wider release on the Jaguar record label. Now this re-release of their debut album garnered a massive response from critics and fans, and everyone suddenly became hyped over Bon Iver. This album is now easily one of the most critically acclaimed albums of the 2000s, easily one of the most of 2008 when it got that re-release, and it's pretty easy to see why. Now, unlike their follow-up album, the self-titled album Bon Iver, and the 22 A Million album which came out last year, which was very messy and fragmented, and I wasn't really into the vocals at all. Unlike those, Bon Iver's debut album, Forever Ago, was filled with so much warmth and this raw, unmatchable folk sound that I feel like a lot of bands then tried to copy in the early 2010s, like Lumineers and Mumford & Sons, but no one ever really quite got it like Bon Iver did. I think this is one of those albums where you can gain some kind of emotional attachment from it without really being able to personally relate to all the topics that are being discussed yourself, even though there are a few tracks that do have those relatable topics. I think the biggest and most obvious one being the very big single from this album, Skinny Love. Skinny Love is a track about a failed relationship and everything that comes from the aftermath of it, and on the chorus it actually gets a little bit bitter as, Justin Vernon kind of whelps out telling his lover what to do. I told you to be patient, I told you to be kind, but it's that kind of thing in a relationship where you just expect something from the other person way more than they can actually give you. But with that hand clap percussion in the background, it ends up becoming a bit of an anthem, and I feel as though it's one of those songs that a lot of people could relate to, in the sense that most people have had a relationship where it ends pretty badly. But it's the sound of this song that keeps me loving this song so much, and it's the sound of this entire album really. It just has this aesthetic should I say, that just keeps me gripped all the way through. I love the speedy, rushed guitar plucking on the track Lumpsum. I love the beautiful refrain on the track Blindsided. Would you really rush out for me now? There are so many moments like this on the album where the vocals just elevate the music to another level. This can especially be said for the track Creature Fear, which is this really soft, slow, beautiful moving track. It has this nice melody, but then towards the end it just crescendos into this amazing thudding of drums and percussion, which leads off into the track Team perfectly. So just to label this album as some kind of contemporary indie folk album would be really doing this album a disservice, because it just goes off in all these different wild directions that you don't expect, especially since the opening track is this really eerie opener in sound and in lyrics, as he describes their love as only being maroon, which is another way of saying that their love is kind of dried out, and pieces of their love have been pulled apart as they've pretty much parted ways. So of course it sets this album up to be this really horrific listen, but there are some moments where the music becomes so beautiful that you're just grabbed by it. And the best example of that being For Emma, where the track is much more upbeat, and you get pulled away from that isolated feeling that's been across the rest of this album. But the track itself is structured in a really interesting way, as it sets itself up as to be like a play, like a dialogue between two different characters. Presumably the two characters are Justin and his former lover, his former girlfriend, and there's an interesting moment where she kind of interrupts him as he's trying to speak, which I find that part really quite interesting on the album as a whole, because so far Justin's kind of set himself up to be this kind of dick in a way, like the way he kind of talks to, his girlfriend on the track Skinny Love and a few other tracks as well, the kind of way he pushes himself above her and blames her, but then on this track, you get her perspective as well. Maybe it's a bit of a self-realization moment for Justin, but then later on in the track, he goes on to quote her, and as she says, "You're still very lovable." So even with that, maybe Justin hasn't really learnt from this, because he still thinks a girl thinks that. But still, this album is filled with brutal honesty, and Justin Vernon doesn't really hold back on his emotions at any one point. You kind of have to respect him for that. And when it's backed with such beautiful music, I can't deny that this really was one of my favourite albums of that year, looking back at that year now. Perhaps the only moment that I didn't really like was the second half of the Wolves Act Part 2, where the vocals get too weird and a bit odd, and it's a bit of a precursor to what Bon Iver did on 22 A Million, because it's those kind of fragmented, kind of electronic-y sounding vocals that I didn't think worked at all on that album, and they do actually come up on this album as well. I'd still highly recommend this album for anyone that loves singer-songwriter music and folk music. You probably already heard it by now if you're a music fan, because this is kind of like a stapled classic in the music industry, in the music community, but still check it out. I would say this is an A-, and yeah, definitely worth your time. Thank you for listening to another episode of A Decade Later. There will be more of these soon, of course. If there are any albums that you want to see on this series, make sure you comment below, and also subscribe for more music reviews every day, and have a good day.